This is CRM Audio, the Microsoft Business Applications podcast. This episode is brought to you by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 80 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. And KingswaySoft now works with CDS and Power Apps. KingswaySoft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including D365, CRM, AX, Nav, GPSL, as well as many other applications. We thank KingswaySoft for sponsoring CRM Audio, the Microsoft Business Applications podcast.
Welcome to CRM Audio. This is Joel Lindstrom, and joining me, since it's nighttime in Australia, I thought we should have another seasoned MVP, and so we invited Steve Mordew. And we also have special guest Brian Galicia, who is the global sales leader for sales automation and LinkedIn for Microsoft. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having me, Joel. It's great to reconnect with you.
And Steve, I thought it'd be good to have you on this episode because, as opposed to a lot of MVPs, you actually sell stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So it's good to have somebody with from an actual sales background on here. I have some sales background, but I'm getting a little rusty because it's been about 11 years since I've been in more of the sales role. But so Brian, you have a big focus on the LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and we've had episodes on before. We've had episodes focused on this before, but we haven't really had somebody like you who is directly connected with that product. And so I guess to start off, somebody is asking you, what is this Sales Navigator thing and why do I want it? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I think the biggest thing that I share is that when we all, mostly, if you're a business professional, we all have LinkedIn profiles, and we all share and post information on our profile, some more than others. The value of Sales Navigator takes that to the next level to where rather than for like if we were a basic user utilizing LinkedIn, we see a whole bunch of information in our feed that kind of gets lost with people we're connected with, but we're not really trying to add value to. We're just connected because we work together. We used to go to high school together. We used to go to the same college. Whereas Sales Navigator gives us a little more prescriptive guidance. Say if I follow, let's say, Steve, and I'm not connected with him because there's not a value yet for me to get connected, but I want to start to stealthily track or see what he's doing. I start to follow him in Sales Navigator to get updates, to see posts, to see things that I would see in LinkedIn, but I would see it in a more focused area with Sales Navigator. But even more so, I get to see the relationships in an account. So what I mean by that, at Microsoft, you can imagine we have thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. There's no way for me to be connected with all of them. I try to, but I'm not connected with all of them. The beauty is that with Sales Navigator, you can take advantage of the relationships that exist across your broad organization and leverage that to turn that to revenue. So being able to say, if I was trying to sell to an account and there was someone, let's say, in Europe that I wasn't connected to, but they work at Microsoft, there potentially is an opportunity for me to leverage and understand that person at Microsoft knows this person I'm trying to get a hold of, and leverage the relationship that person has just because we work at the same company. So in a short way, that's one of the big, huge values that corporations can have because it unlocks the relationships of their organizations so sellers can take advantage of them.
Seems like it's also a way to kind of do that in a little bit more of an anonymous fashion than, going and clicking on someone's profile and logged into LinkedIn. They're getting some notice that Steve looked at your profile. I might not be that level of interested yet. I'm just kind of scoping around to see who's who. And over in Sales Navigator, I can kind of add people. I don't think they're necessarily aware that I'm looking at them yet, just to decide if this is something I should pursue. And I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think I find common misconceptions about Sales Navigator. In the Microsoft Business Applications world, a lot of people think that just means, that's the interface between Dynamics and LinkedIn, when it's really a lot more. Sales Navigator by itself is a sales enablement product. It's a premium version of LinkedIn focused on sales, for sales enablement, for lead management, for finding people. Even outside of, there's a lot of people who use it that don't even tie it into a CRM system.
Yeah, that's right, Joel. I mean, you're spot on. You think about LinkedIn in general, because of course we paid $26.2 billion for LinkedIn, and people ask me all the time, "Hey, so what value am I getting from a customer?" And that's a fair question. And so what we want to do is we want to empower our users to, in the right scenario, give them access to LinkedIn information, whether that be regarding a selling scenario, a talent scenario, marketing scenario, even a learning scenario. And so exactly your point, Sales Navigator is this great way. Could it be used standalone? Yes. But there's a lot of big benefit that when you tie the benefits of Sales Navigator and you pull it into a business application CRM tool like Dynamics 365, that's where, again, our point of view is that's where you can get some significant value, because you're leveraging the relationships and understanding the insights that Sales Navigator is bringing, but then you're pulling that into the in context, what I like to refer to as the in-context experience. So when I look at Joel in Dynamics, I don't have to leave the experience to see what information may exist about Joel in Sales Navigator. I get all that information in the place I'm at, and Sales Navigator doesn't become a silo of information to where things you're doing, like sending an email or a message or even a point drive experience, that information doesn't get stored just in Sales Navigator. If you choose to, you can actually then start to merge that information back into Dynamics as an activity, so you get this holistic view about how that engagement is going and the health of that engagement across many different communication channels, which could include LinkedIn and Sales Navigator.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions we run into with customers is they're thinking that this is some sort of a LinkedIn mining tool, and that's not at all what it is. But they're used to maybe a couple of the other tools that are out there that do that thing, like enhancing a record with information from sources, and that's not what this tool is really designed to do. And so they might initially be a little disappointed. Oh, I thought I could connect this to LinkedIn and it's just going to populate all my records and data and stuff like that. So then you have to kind of pivot the conversation from, well, I know you're not happy that it doesn't do that, but let me show you what it does do that you hadn't even thought about or known about.
You're spot on, Steve. I think the biggest thing is that you can imagine privacy. We hold that very true, and LinkedIn holds that very true as well. Even before we acquired LinkedIn, huge focus on privacy, because you can imagine all of us, we invest our time and effort to put information into the experience. And of course, we don't give permission to all of a sudden say, hey, Steve's information is now going to be sucked into all these different CRM tools. And exactly to your point, that's not the intent of the scenario, because LinkedIn is about building relationships, not spamming people. And so we think about how that can play, and we'll talk about this more. When we think about how that can add value, it still adds, to your point, tremendous value, Stephen, utilizing in the right way. But there are other tools, as each of you know, there are other tools that are intended to build that data enrichment, such as everyone knows, this relationship we have with a company called InsightView and Insights that comes for value in North America. Customers who buy Dynamics 365 get that value as part of the scenario, which can provide that level of detail that you were mentioning, Steve, about enriching the data, about other news that LinkedIn may know about, or just your basic email. If we know if it can get that from other places, InsightView does a great job to push that in, and then complementing that with the things we'll continue to talk about with the value of Sales Navigator adds to a richer experience for the end user.
They are very complementary, because I've got several customers that use both. And think about the day one experience. I want the sales rep to log in and see data there. If you log into an empty system, it's not very valuable. But if I can use InsightView to load some contact data, or at least be able to see a lot of data about the company day one, that's a lot of value. But then as I'm building relationships and following people on LinkedIn, to be able to tie that in as well. But plus, I think the other misconception I see is people don't really realize the breadth of the integration, because you see a Sales Navigator, you think, oh, salespeople. But we also have the integration with the lead generation forms, with marketing. We have the integration with talent for HR purposes. There's a lot more to this than just the sales piece.
Exactly. I mean, you're spot on, Joel, where you add all these different components. And again, it really depends. It all starts with what is the ultimate goal you're trying to achieve? What are you enabling your selling organization to go do? And based upon what you find valuable to allow your sellers to sell the value of whatever you sell, product, offering, services, whatever it may be, the solutions that can complement what that allows you to go do could be a combination of everything. So when people say, hey, should I just be investing in Sales Navigator or should I just be investing in data enrichment tools? I would say it depends. Like you could, or you can look at it holistically because to your point, Joel, I find that many of the customers that make this investment, they're investing in all of them because they realize each of the components add value in a different way to allow that seller to have the best experience in selling the value back to a customer.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of on the thinking that customers want to invest in all of them. I think more often than not, customers would prefer to invest in fewer of them and get all of the benefits. It seems like with the LinkedIn integration and the data enrichment, if you will, it does seem like there's an opportunity if I have a connection. And it's kind of like the Sales Navigator is held to a higher standard even than external tools are that are able to access the same data set. And it seems like there could be an opportunity to extend that. Since I have a relationship, with this person in LinkedIn, let me, through that relationship, at least bring into my record some enrichment of the same kind of data I could get if I just went out and logged in through Sales Navigator. It didn't seem like that would be a breach of trust.
Yeah, so there are things that we are doing in the future that helps to figure out what data can we pull in, because again, it all comes down to data privacy and the membership first type of scenario. But like one example would be, let's say, Steve, you move jobs, and not to say you are, but let's say you move jobs, and of course, within any CRM tool, even Dynamics, you're parented to some company that you work for. And so one of the things we always get feedback on from customers is, how do I know when a job change occurs, and how can you update my system to denote that job change occurs? So today, of course, that occurs where you get alerts if you're following the people in Sales Navigator. Of course, you get that insight. You get that data point that says something happened. So in the future, there will be a capability that allows us to say, Steve actually no longer works at this company, because one of the ways when we synchronize information back from Sales Navigator back in Dynamics, we don't do it today, but that is a scenario we're thinking about in the future, is if it denotes that when we synchronize that data at the time, it says, wow, Steve worked at company XYZ, that sits in our dynamic system, but lo and behold, he updated his Sales Navigator, or not his Sales Navigator, his LinkedIn profile to be working at company ABC. Then denoting, not making the change directly in Dynamics, because we want to validate that actually occurred, but making a notation in a record that says no longer at company. So it gives an opportunity for a marketing resource or a person who's accountable for data quality in the tool to run a report to say how many of these records fit this profile, to then go back and validate, did this person actually make a job change at a different company, and should we make the update in our own CRM tool?
Yeah, and then we have a button to make that update. Just a feature request.
That's right. That's right.
So,
baby steps.
Question for you, Brian, on this. Given, and it speaks for the quality. I think that LinkedIn is really the only social media platform, with maybe the exception of the Facebook at Work stuff, but basically only social media platform that people actually pay for, either through premium subscriptions or through Sales Navigator. So there's a value there, and part of that value is being able to, for example, target people through InMail. So if you use Sales Navigator and I'm not connected to you, Brian, I can send you a message through InMail, and there's a quota that I have, and so there's that right now, but as this becomes more popular, how do you preserve the quality of that channel while still giving salespeople the ability to use it? Because I'm already seeing kind of an increase in what I would consider non-solicited, non-relevant messages from not just recruiters, but also financial advisors in my neighborhood and things like that really borderline spam for me. So how do you balance that with the competing interests of the users of LinkedIn versus the people who are paying to be able to target those users?
Yeah, and so that's always going to be a $1,000,000 question as to what is the best way to engage your customer. And unfortunately, for people who aren't trained, and a lot of it is change management and utilizing the right tool. Because if you coin the phrase, I didn't coin this phrase, but I see this a lot with a lot of social selling influencers, the people who really pay attention to the selling acumen and the job of being a seller. If you give a fool a tool, you're still a fool. And so it's one of those things where the seller has to see the value and use the tool in the right way, because you can't leverage Sales Navigator to send, to your point, Joel, an in-mail and do that in-mail in the same way you do an email of spamming someone via email. And that's the unfortunate thing that unfortunately still happens, where someone buys a tool because they think, oh, it's just another medium for me to do that. And like, it's not about that, because it's always about how do I add value back to the customer.
Yeah, and I see people do it really well, and I've gone through the training and we've led the training, and there's definitely a way to do it, which is find things that people are legitimately interested in, people that align with your message. But if other people aren't trained or are doing it wrong or are poisoning the well for the rest of us, what controls do you have in there for a Sales Navigator user that maybe is sending messages in the wrong way? I mean, can people get blacklisted, or what kind of mechanisms like that does LinkedIn have?
Yeah, so what ends up happening is that people block people. So all of a sudden, similar to like Twitter or other social channels, you ultimately can say, geez, this person is not someone I want to engage with. Either disconnect them from your network. So if they unfortunately take the approach of, which I've seen sellers do, and it's unfortunate, but people say, oh, let me connect with you, Joel. And then what's the first thing they do after they connect with you? They start spamming you with, hey, I want to sell to you. Versus taking the approach of something you find in common, something of adding a value. And so it's really tough for even Sales Navigator itself, irrespective of dynamics or not. It comes down to, A, training, but two, LinkedIn creates security settings that allow you to either block people or, unfortunately, creates a scenario where the customer says, hey, I want to then not allow my profile to be more open, meaning that the only way you can in-mail me, rather than being an open networker, the only way you can send me stuff is if you know my email or you do something that shows that you have a connection with me.
So has your career working now with LinkedIn Sales Navigator, has that changed the ways that you personally use LinkedIn? What have you learned through this process that has made your LinkedIn experience better?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing, Joel. I think Microsoft, even way before we acquired LinkedIn, back in 2015, I had the fortunate, humbling opportunity to actually present at the LinkedIn Sales Connect conference, because part of it is Microsoft back then was trying to make the determination, is making an investment in broad Sales Navigator. And similar to all other companies and whoever's listening to this podcast, same boat. If you've never used Sales Navigator and you go, gosh, why would I pay for this? We had to try to figure out what type of value it's going to bring. And I think what you find, Joel and Steve, and you probably would agree with this, that most people start out with, if you're a seller and you don't know what Sales Navigator is, you probably pay for the premium subscription, meaning that you put your credit card in because you want to unlock some additional features and additional data, because using free LinkedIn, you can do some things, but it can't do it as effectively because you get limitations, which rightfully so. There's use rights to say how many searches you can do, how many in-mails can you send, how many times can people you can look at and see who's looked at your profile. There's certain things that, again, for rightfully so, LinkedIn monetizes the value of that capability. And through that, as I was getting really good about, okay, there has to be a better way to sell versus traditional me being in a selling profession, for sales leader and a seller myself for a long time, you all take the approach, we've all been guilty of just trying to call people and say, hey, I want to talk to you. And then I shortly realized, after really embracing LinkedIn and not having my LinkedIn profile be a resume, but a resource, and taking that approach of selling value, not just selling to sell, that's where, again, utilizing LinkedIn in the way it should be used, that's where it unlocked a lot of power, because part of it, I always said, it always starts with the profile. When you look at someone's profile, what does it say? Does it say that, hey, I'm touting myself as a seller that sells really well and hit my quota and crush my quota every year? It's great if you're looking for a job, but if you're trying to sell value to a customer, that's actually a big turnoff. And so I used to do that, but then I realized, wait a second, there's a better way to do that. First, changing the profile so it ends up being a resource for a customer. Second is, how do you approach exactly what you and Steve are alluding to? How do you start utilizing LinkedIn to find that value? And part of it is you're trying to see who you can sell value to where it makes sense to. And so immediately it doesn't mean that I'm going to connect with you and start selling to you. It means that I'm going to do what we most do, like when we create friendships, business relationships. You build that relationship and that trust before you even sell anything. And so LinkedIn does a great job of having these buying signals to say, this person just changed jobs, this person posted, this person follows your company. Those are all things that Sales Navigator unlocks for a seller that, if used in the right way, can offer that value. And that's, to your point, Joel, that's how I transformed myself several years ago. And I immediately saw value. Within 6 months, the amount of conversation and the ability to unlock the right conversation with the right people totally changed. And I think the biggest thing I would say to sellers listening to this, you can't just say that you're going to do this within a week and you're going to see dramatic changes. It's kind of like working out. I don't like working out, but you can't lose 10 pounds in a day. It takes it takes months to hone that craft. And so the biggest thing is, if you take the approach of being a modern seller, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a period of time where you're doing different things to start embracing that concept. And once you start embracing it, I have high confidence that it's going to change the way you have customer conversations with your customers.
Yeah, I think that's the big challenge for the sellers is to take this patience mindset that they're quota-driven sellers. They don't have patience. They're trying to meet quota this month. They can't just go floating around there hoping eventually you ask them what they do. So they can kind of see the value of building that network. But this tool, you're right, is not designed for that. Even though it might look like it. Oh, look, I can send an email and blast my sales message right to the CEO. That doesn't mean that's going to be effective at all. And in fact, it probably hurt your chances more than anything, more than help it.
So I see there's some seems like overlap in some functionality set between Dynamics and Sales Navigator, between some lead functionality. Think of things like Point Drive versus the email, the capability with Relationship Insights to see when an email or an attachment were opened, or to see the ability like with the Who Knows Whom feature in Sales AI, and then the who knows this person on LinkedIn. So is that going to come together in the future?
It is, Joel. It comes back to that conversation we were having earlier, which is the value what like an inside view ISV brings with Sales Navigator. Our point of view is that there's different scenarios that we want to enrich that value proposition. So a seller, as they put information in the tool, they're getting information back based upon what's the best way to have the right value conversation with their customer. And so I agree. Like, there's so many ways that a seller can position something back to a customer. Sending an email, like the basic way that I think all of us do, is that we leave a meeting and the customer says, "Hey, Joel, that was great. Can you send me XYZ?" And what do? We send an email with a whole bunch of attachments, or we send them an email with a OneDrive or a pointer to a SharePoint, or maybe an invitation to our team site to share information. I think based upon what the customer is trying to do, that could be the right approach. Or Point Drive, again, to specify the point, Point Drive comes with Sales Navigator. It's a great way. What I found it'd be very valuable is if you want to create a personalized experience that has a whole bunch of different, very, very specific resources that you want to give to a customer, whether it be a video, a presentation, a data sheet, a pointer to something, LinkedIn with Sales Navigator or Point Drive gives you that ability to create this personalized site that allows then the seller, as a customer engages with that Point Drive, see the insights of what's happening. In particular, if that mail gets forwarded around with that Point Drive, you start to see people clicking on it. The big difference is that because that's based on LinkedIn, you get the LinkedIn data. So again, privacy reasons, there's still an opt-out where the only way we see the engagement is if someone says, yes, I'm willing to share that I'm looking at this with LinkedIn. And so the good news is most of us are already pre-logged in with our LinkedIn credentials on our desktop or on our phone that immediately can track that and say, oh, hey, it's Joel looking at this. And we see all that rich information because it's Joel. We know you don't have to enter anything information in. It's just taking the information that you have from your LinkedIn experience. So that's where I see Point Drive really come to value because it takes the information that LinkedIn already knows about that person and gives that insight if the customer is willing to share it back to that seller. But to those other points you're mentioning about who knows whom, live org charts, some of the great innovation that's coming in core dynamics as well as AI for sales, I view it as it provides additional capability. And as we were doing the pre-call, one of the great examples is, Joel, like we know each other. We've known each other, for several years when but even before you were at Hitachi, when you're at a partner called Customer Effective. And so, unfortunately, and I'm going to remedy this, I realized that we weren't connected on LinkedIn, even though we know each other. So someone
it's just sad.
I know it is kind of sad. It's shame on me that I'm gonna fix that. So when people look at our connections, they're going to go, oh, now Brian's connected with Joel. But anyway, the one thing is, if I was someone trying to determine, gosh, how does Brian know Joel? The thing, it would not show up on LinkedIn. So this is where LinkedIn adds value because it shows the relationship, but only shows the relationship if someone proactively reached out and said, making the connection. But behind the scenes, as we know, like I know I've sent you email in the past from my Microsoft alias, either to your Customer Effective alias or to your current Hitachi alias. So the fact that the Office Graph, quote unquote Office Graph, or Office knows that we've had those meetings, we've had those email engagements, we've had those interactions. The great news is who knows whom helps to bridge that gap to allow that seller to see more of that broader relationship that LinkedIn may or may not know about, because not every seller proactively sends a connection request to their buyer. And again, it may not make sense to you yet, but they've been definitely having exchanges. And so imagine unlocking that for your selling organization where anyone, you don't have to be a seller, anyone in your organization who's on your Office or your Exchange online environment, if they opt into it and to share that, allows someone to immediately see strength of connection, meaning that, oh, it looks like Steve knows Brian or knows Joel, not through LinkedIn, but just knows because there's been email exchanges. We don't, for privacy reasons, again, it always comes back to privacy and security and all that stuff. We don't see any of the detail of what's happened in the past. All we see is that the strength of connection in like kind of a little bar chart area where if there's one email that's gone out, it might show up in red. If there's many emails that go out, it might show up in yellow. If there's a ton of emails that start to go out, it might show up in green. Just showing that there's some type of really strong connection that exists, that then that seller can reach out to whoever that is and say, hey, how well do you know Joel, or how well do you know Brian? If you know him well, it seems like you know them well. Would you mind if you made a warm introduction on my behalf? And studies have shown, and you can admit it, we all believe that if we have a stronger relationship with someone, especially if it's someone that we've had business connections with, we're more likely to entertain a conversation versus a random reach out by someone that we don't even know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is a great way to elevate that dialogue to where it's not just LinkedIn Sales Navigator, but it's who knows whom. It's all this other information we're providing to the seller to give them the best source of information to figure out how best to build that relationship. And again, to Steve's point, it's giving us also the information to say, is there value there for even me to, is that the right person to target? But is that the right person that I should be reaching out to based upon the warm introductions that may exist in my organization?
And that's what made the light bulb go on for me when I actually looked at the who knows who and realized that, wait, if this is somebody in my domain, in my Office 365 tenant that is maybe another division somewhere in a different part of the country, and they're actually interacting with the person, that tells me they know them and they give me the warm introduction. And then the LinkedIn, I think, is the other aspect that might be, maybe I'm connected with them professionally, or associations, or some other way of knowing them. Maybe I'm not emailing them from work, but I'm connected with them in some other way. The two together really, I think, tell a compelling story, and that's where I would love to see those come together. But there's other things, and we could probably talk an hour just on that topic. But there's other things in this wave of the roadmap that are kind of making the LinkedIn components come out of the Sales Navigator box that are pretty exciting. So can you talk to some of those other things that are becoming possible?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And so I would say that there's many, because you can imagine with both of your working very closely with Microsoft, there's so much innovation that we're doing across the broad Microsoft stack. And so a lot of the innovation we're doing across how do we expose LinkedIn information is coming in multiple ways. One simple way is the example of, Joel, if I was sharing my desktop right now, the emails that we've had exchanges on, I could actually just open up your Outlook. It has nothing to do with Dynamics, but just being able to expose the Sales Navigator or LinkedIn information from my Outlook experience, where a very simple example that's live today is I can open up, let's say, Outlook Web Access, pull up the email you just sent me, open up your Outlook contact card, and I immediately see your LinkedIn and your Sales Navigator details just in the experience without having to leave the experience. So one way of unlocking the value of that data. Another good way is you think about the innovation we're doing with Power BI, a wealth of great analytics to pull in a whole bunch of data sources. One of the things we'll be doing in the near term is having Power BI gain connectivity to the administrative and usage information of Sales Navigator. So things like how many leads or contacts or leads that Sales Navigator calls quote unquote leads, but more of contacts that exist in the system. How many sellers are following a certain amount of leads where they're clicking the follow button in Sales Navigator, say, I want to track what that person's doing behind the scenes. Because you can imagine those data points of what that person's doing in Sales Navigator can correlate to the fact that how well are they doing in their pipeline? How well are they doing in close rates? How well are they doing in expanding the relationships at a specific account? And when you can do that in a simple way of pulling data that exists in Dynamics via Power BI, and you can pull that data that exists within Sales Navigator and marry the two, it will always translate to showing the value of the value of your investment, but also proving out to sellers who are skeptical about modern selling approaches or digital selling approaches. They'll shortly realize that their peers who are adopting these modern selling best practices are seeing value because their pipeline is bigger, their close rates are better, and these are all historical stats that not only Microsoft has seen, but many customers have done this work before we even have this integration, have done that work to try to marry the two data points together, showcase that. And then one scenario that I'm really excited about, you can imagine, and I know you've had conversations on podcasts in the past, is the Power Platform. So you think about Power Apps and the whole things that Dynamics is built upon about this Power Platform. Imagine being able to create a very personalized kind of citizen service type of experience and pull in LinkedIn data. So the great news is that it's in preview. It's not fully released yet, but it's in preview where if you have a Power Apps capability or you have Power Apps and you're building something that both of your partners, organizations do on behalf of Microsoft for your customers, being able to take that app where you're building all these great things and say, okay, does it make sense when Joel's name comes in here through the Power Apps experience? How can I take the LinkedIn Sales Navigator information and overlay that to add additional value, such as the icebreakers of how I can have a conversation with you, or the news of information of because you work for Hitachi and what's happening in that experience. So again, comes back into the way we do with Dynamics, which is how do we enrich that experience in the context of that record. So I'm so excited. That's why I love being in this role, because there's a lot of great things that we're doing, and I can't share everything on this podcast, but that hopefully gives everyone who's listening a flavor of how we're trying to take the LinkedIn experience and really add value across many different things. And that just doesn't have to be about Dynamics. It could be a lot of different things, and talent is another good example where it could be a totally separate topic, but all the things about how you find the right talent with Dynamics 365 for talent, and then how do you take that with recruiting on LinkedIn. There's a great marriage of the two together. When put together, again, offers great value to the customer. Not that you're forced to use both, but when you do make an investment, there's a lot of different things that we're doing in a great way to take the value of LinkedIn and putting that into many different areas of Microsoft.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear the Power Platform story there. I think there's certain industries where salespeople, insurance agents is a good example, where I'm seeing a lot of value in building really dirt simple sales experiences for people because they don't have a lot of attention span, or they're not technically proficient, or they just need to do simple stuff to track their opportunities, and being able to put LinkedIn in there is a good thing.
Exactly. I mean, I think once that comes out, I can't share when that's actually going to get fully released, but there's just so much value and power of taking our platform, especially the Power Platform, and embedding different other areas of value, and LinkedIn eventually being one of them that will add tremendous value in those types of financial services scenarios.
So there are competing platforms that are integrated with Sales Navigator. There's a Salesforce in-app exchange for LinkedIn Sales Navigator for Salesforce. How is Microsoft walking that line of keeping those customers happy while giving a richer experience on Dynamics?
Of course you would ask me that question, Joel. I think the biggest thing is that, as you've seen with our leadership with Satya, et cetera, I mean, we want to empower customers and people to do more. And so we know that not everyone's going to make a choice for a Microsoft platform, including Dynamics for business applications. So the whole intent of LinkedIn is that, and hopefully customers still see this, which is LinkedIn does provide these capabilities to our other competitors and scenarios out there. And so they have access to the same Snap. So LinkedIn, we're just talking specifically about LinkedIn, there's what's called the Snap Control, which is an API that not every single person under the sun has access to, again, for privacy reasons, et cetera. You can't just get access to the API of LinkedIn and start doing stuff with it. You have to go through a very rigorous engagement to understand what's the value you're going to bring to the platform and why should there be a partnership there. But of course, a competitor like Salesforce, they do have access to the same information. So it's just up to them as to the innovation that occurs. So that whatever they decide to do, they decide to do because they have access to the same API that we do. The hope is that if someone's made the investment with Microsoft, that we do it at a much rapid pace, because at the end of the day, I always inform customers that you think about who owns the component, who owns the experience. Well, Microsoft does, of course, because LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft a year and a half ago. And so that experience, we will come out with innovative ways because our teams are working very closely together. We're going to figure out more innovative ways, hopefully, that provides that value that any other competitor can get. But that doesn't prevent someone from saying, could they still get that value of what they invested in? Yes. But our point of view is that we hopefully will come up with innovation that makes it even more richer, because the example I always give is to a sales leader who asks me this question. I say, hey, Mr. Customer, what are the three components? And Steve, you could probably agree with this too. What are the three components your sellers or you as a seller do every day? What are the tools they have access to that they use every day? One's always going to be productivity, so whether that be Office or something else. Two is it's going to be some type of business application, whether it be a very robust tool like Dynamics or something like simple things like Outlook or Excel. And then third, it's LinkedIn. So if you're a B2B seller, you're going to utilize all those three things. Well, at least you hopefully are. You're going to be utilizing all three tools sometime during the day to get your job done. And so the question is, who owns all three assets? Microsoft does. And so we have the ability to think about all those scenarios holistically, because it's not just about LinkedIn. We want to think about it holistically to say, how is a seller in a selling profession trying to do their job? Kind of alludes to the theme of what we're talking about. There's different ways to do it, but our approach is that we want to think about the holistic view that we can provide to a customer so that in addition to LinkedIn, we're adding that value across Teams, across Office, across AI. We touched upon who knows whom and the AI capabilities. A lot of rich information because we own Azure, we own Cortana, we own all these things that hopefully can provide a very rich experience across everything, not just LinkedIn.
I mean, I think that's the biggest part of the whole story is not that since you own LinkedIn, you can create your own special tunnel into it. You use the same tunnel anybody can use. Salesforce, anybody can utilize the exact same connection points that you guys have, no more, no less. It's just that you have so many more assets to deploy those same kind of connection points to across that whole stack, as opposed to, for example, Salesforce just around the CRM side. And I think it's going to be a matter of, who's going to invest the most into lighting up those equal capabilities across their own stack. And we're starting to see that now, really, I think, with LinkedIn and Microsoft. I think up until recently, it really has kind of looked like an ISV solution. But now we're starting to see where, you're leveraging some of those capabilities, same capabilities anybody else out there with access to the API has. You're just using them more creatively and using them across more components.
Yeah, now thanks for that, Steve. That's a great way to summarize it. I think one great example was, or a couple of examples that I'll just throw out there. One is, as we know, there's a huge push within Dynamics to go to the new UCI, or the new modern experience. We were the first vendor out there, and Salesforce has now followed suit, but we were with Lightning, but we were the first vendor out there to actually allow you to componentize the Sales Navigator widget experience to where in the UCI framework, as both of you guys know, ability to expose Sales Navigator on the left or on the right or in the middle or wherever you want versus just an iframe that shows the entire Sales Navigator experience. So a implementer or a customer can choose what component of Sales Navigator in that scenario or context on a record, not just with selling entities, but let's say, because both of you are partners, you do great work, a custom entity that a customer says, hey, Joel or Steve, I need to build this custom thing, but I need to have Sales Navigator built into that within Dynamics. We can now do that. And so other people follow suit, but we were first to market to go do that. Another one that just came out that, again, first to market, which we're really proud of, is Point Drive. So we're talking about Point Drive. Of course, we don't want to have Point Drive be siloed to where there's interaction happening and there's no way someone in Dynamics cannot see what's happening. And so one great thing that just occurred is being able to have, when a Point Drive gets sent out, how do we take that rich information of what's happening and push that in as an activity record? Will Salesforce do that? Probably, eventually. But we were able to have that come out first because, again, exactly to your point, Steve, we're figuring out how to enrich our broad platform with the value of the scenarios that LinkedIn can bring to us. And other competitors have access to the same API. Our hope is that we're just doing that faster at a quicker pace and doing it in a way that provides this rich experience of customer buys into the broad One Microsoft portfolio.
And it tells a great story where you were first to market and a richer experience, but we're still adding value for people who aren't yet on the Microsoft Business Application Platform and letting them leverage this channel. And we're getting close to the end of our time here, but question V9 on premises just came out. Can you clarify what's available with integration with on-premise Dynamics versus Dynamics 365 Online?
Yeah, so there is a site, and I won't be able to kind of provide all that level of detail on this podcast, but there is a site on documents.microsoft.com. Of course, I don't know the exact URL, but on documents, the doc.microsoft.com website, there is a release notes to say what was made available in the on-premise release as part of the October or the fall wave, in addition to what's available with the cloud. I would say a couple things. One would be that because people ask me all the time, because we're talking about Sales Navigator and the richness of it, the one thing for people listening to the podcast is that we do have capabilities to integrate with LinkedIn Sales Navigator with an on-prem environment. It just doesn't have as robust of an integration scenario. And so what I mean by that is the widget can still be exposed in on-premises, but you don't get the richness of syncing capabilities like syncing in-mails or syncing messages or notes or the new capabilities of Point Drive. Those things don't come into place when you have on-prem. But the good news is, could you still get value of some of those capabilities using on-prem? Yes. You just don't get the richness of experience. And you'll continue to see that because there are going to be scenarios that can only get lit up when you deploy in a cloud environment. I think outside of that, there are a whole bunch of other rich information that got deployed in on-prem, but I think the other comment I would make is that many of the innovations that we are doing as well are going to be surrounding the UCI experience. So things like playbooks, we didn't touch upon that, but things like playbooks, which gives a sales manager the ability to create a very robust playbook scenario to where if I try to close a deal, this opportunity, and hey, what's the playbook for that? Being able to have a sales manager or a power user create that versus having to have an administrator create that. Those are things that will only exist in the UCI framework and not exist, as an example, in the traditional legacy web client. So just be aware that much of the rich innovation that our R&D team is doing is going to be surrounding UCI versus the traditional web client that many people have been exposed to who have been working with Dynamics, even before Dynamics 365, have been working on.
Yeah, for sure. And what I tell people is get the October release notes, and basically that's your answer. What can't you do on premise?
That's right. Yeah.
I've got one more kind of point of clarification maybe you can help with, Brian. We've got customers out there that have individual Sales Navigator users. That's kind of how they had moved forward and slowly grew their team of individual Sales Navigator users. And of course, to use the integration, those would need to be moved to a Sales Navigator team. And one of the questions that has come up is, what does that team provide beyond just the ability to connect and sync, or maybe some simpler administration? Is there more going on behind the team Navigator than just what's going on behind a bunch of individual Sales Navigator users?
Yeah, so fair question, Steve. So I think the biggest thing you think about it, most people, it kind of the starting point is most people, well, not most, everyone uses free. Because if you create a LinkedIn profile, you ultimately actually utilizing the free service. And then sellers realize, because if you're actively in LinkedIn, you start doing searches. And for those of you listening to this podcast, you may have run across it at a point. There is a use limit. I don't know exactly what it is, but there is a use limit per month that restricts you from doing a heavy amount of searches, where all of a sudden it's going to prompt you to say, hey, you've hit the use case scenario where you can't use this for the month anymore. You have to wait until the next month until the clock resets. So that's when people pay with a credit card, and they use what I refer to as the professional edition of Sales Navigator or professional edition of LinkedIn. It's a great starting point, but the thing that typically happens, Steve, is that if a selling organization has, let's say, hundreds of people, and you have hundreds of people utilizing free, or not free, but premium subscriptions with a credit card, the challenge that doesn't get resolved is that all those people, that kind of where we're talking about utilizing, unlocking your broad company's network. Unfortunately, LinkedIn treats all those people as individual people, not being part of one company. And so the customer doesn't get the big benefit of unlocking those relationships with all those sellers who may or may not be connected with one another. They all of a sudden don't have the ability to see the network of their peers because they're not technically on the same kind of LinkedIn tenant or LinkedIn platform. So one of the big benefits are going to a corporate agreement, whether it be Teams or Enterprise, because there are two specific options that do light up the integration scenarios, one being Teams, one being Enterprise. Being the more premium, the highest tier edition is that it unlocks the team capabilities from a standpoint of, if you had 100 sellers all paying with credit card and you put all 100 sellers on a, for example, a Team or Enterprise Sales Navigator edition, now you, at a very basic level, you now have created the capability of all those sellers being able to leverage their networks without having to be connected to one another. I think that's one of the biggest things. Other things that start to get unlocked are the things that where someone is really utilizing Sales Navigator, where you start hitting restriction points in a premium subscription. Things like number of in-mails. We were talking about in-mails. There, you get a certain amount when you use credit cards, but that gets increased when you go up to the next edition, or it gets even bigger when you go to the top edition of Enterprise. Or things like point drives, where you get restricted as to the number of point drives, or even having access to point drives, because I believe that with a credit card subscription, you don't even get access to point drive. You get point drive when you subscribe to Team, you get point drive if you subscribe to Enterprise, but on an Enterprise, rather than saying you only have a certain amount of point drives you can create per month, on an Enterprise edition, you get unlimited amounts. And the last one is that I think is very applicable to especially large customers who consider themselves enterprise accounts. By having the Enterprise edition of Sales Navigator, you get things like single sign-on, which allows you to not have to create multiple login points, etc. As we all know, single sign-on is great productivity enhancement. Single sign-on only gets enabled when you have an Enterprise Sales Navigator edition. So do you have to utilize Enterprise of Sales Navigator? Not necessarily. It's your choice. There's if you go to the LinkedIn Sales Solutions site on LinkedIn and do a comparison, there's a nice site that shows a comparison of all the editions. You can make a determination of what Sales Navigator solution makes as a best fit for you.
And for those customers, for example, that may have 50 or 100 individual users that have kind of grown up over time, to move that into a team is a pretty straightforward process. They're not going to lose all of their stuff that they've been tracking. And individually, starting over, there's a process to shift them over. Now they're part of this team.
That's correct, yeah, because the biggest thing, as you can imagine, Steve, is if for anyone who've used Sales Navigator, huge benefit because you've taken the time to save or follow a whole bunch of people. And so the one thing you don't want to have happen is if, let's say, you're a seller and you're pretty active and you followed, like, let's say 500 people and you're following 200 accounts, you don't want to go through that process again to redo that. So the good news is, to switch over to a different contract. To do that, it keeps that information. And then, again, a shout out for those who are interested in how we do that. The good news is at Microsoft, because, again, another value add of a competitive differentiation is that because LinkedIn is part of Microsoft, we have the flexibility to position, and if we earn the right for a customer's business, we have an offering that takes the two together. So rather than having to pay for Sales Navigator separately and pay for Dynamics separately, and of course, that's a potentially expensive proposition because Sales Navigator is a premium solution, and rightfully so because it adds value. So the one thing that we find is that customers who buy them separately, there's a pretty big price to pay, especially if they're not utilizing Dynamics. It can be a pretty expensive value proposition, but we do have a scenario where we can sell the two together that offers the price point in a much more richer, better value add to allow a customer to get that value if they choose to get it in an easier way so it gets put on their Microsoft agreement and they can get the value of the two at a lower price point.
Is there a minimum quantity of licenses you have to buy to take advantage of that?
You do. So it does require you to be on an enterprise agreement. So unfortunately, if you are a customer out there that buys on a different channel and doesn't have an EA, unfortunately, you can't get that benefit. You could still use the integration. You just can't get the monetization benefit of buying that. But then to your point, Joel, it does require a 10-seat minimum purchase. So if you're an enterprise customer and you say, I only want to try this out, I don't know what I would get yet, and I only want to have 5 users, unfortunately, we can't sell it at five users. There's a 10-seat minimum. But it's still attractive, but there's a 10-seat minimum to buy it on a commercial EA agreement.
So what happens with somebody who has Sales Navigator as part of company A, and then they leave that company? They retain their personal LinkedIn account. They lose the Sales Navigator stuff. Then they move to job B and get Sales Navigator. Do they have to refollow all those leads and everything, or do they retain that through their account?
Yeah, unfortunately. So a couple things, and that's a great question because we get that asked too, Joel. One thing is that your data is your data. So meaning that when you put in your LinkedIn profile in there, and of course you have to associate your LinkedIn profile to the Sales Navigator experience because the company needs to know that you're tied to that contract. So once you leave and you move companies, you still keep your profile. Your profile never goes away. Your email, of course, at that company goes away, but you always maintain your profile because it's tied to your own personal experience. When you switch contracts, and let's say the next company you work for also has Sales Navigator, unfortunately, there wouldn't be a way to kind of get that back. But the good news is with the integration, and we didn't touch upon this, but the other thing that this question is timely because what we do is if you, let's say, Joel or Steve, you're let's say you own accounts in Dynamics as an owner, because as we know, when you have an account in Dynamics, whether an account or a contact, there has to be an owner. Let's say you're a seller that owns those accounts in Dynamics. When you set up the syncing integration between Sales Navigator and Dynamics, and let's say your customer has invested in Dynamics and you start to own those accounts or contacts, we will automatically pre-follow or pre-follow those names inside of Sales Navigator to save that seller some time, so that if they all of a sudden had all those people and they got reassigned those in their own Dynamics experience, it helps save time to where that user would start to follow all those people in Sales Navigator directly.
It's an interesting scenario because the relationship is on the personal level. So that sales rep leaves, he or she has that relationship, but there may be content around point drives and things like that the company would want to keep.
That's right.
It's the same age-old argument of who owns my Rolodex, right? I mean, the company owns and you mentioned the seller owns the account in CRM, but actually the company owns the account,
right?
And so it would seem that would be a challenge for a company owner, that if I add you to my Sales Navigator team, you're going to connect to all of our company accounts, all our businesses, and then when you leave, that follows with you. Yeah, so you mentioned that as unfortunately earlier, Brian, that they'll lose that. I don't think it's unfortunate at all. I think they probably should lose that in that scenario and have to start over. But it's a big issue.
They would still have
with
their
companies out
connections. If they connected with somebody, they'd still have
Yeah.
a connection.
That's correct, Joel. I think that's the biggest takeaway, and that's fair, Steve. Like, they still have the connection, so if someone through their business experience made that connection, they kept that connection, they would still have that. The thing that, exactly to your point, Steve, what they lose is they lose all the follow of those accounts, and let's say they went to a competitor and had to follow those accounts again, the only way that they would get those back is either A, they did it one by one again, to your point, because it's like, hey, you're going to have to redo those things again, or if in Dynamics to make it easier for not even that scenario, just in a new user scenario, if you had a seller that was tracking a whole bunch of accounts and they were assigned to them in Dynamics, it just saves some time to where it will automatically pre-follow them. It doesn't create a connection. All it does is says, I'm now starting to follow those people in Sales Navigator and saving some time rather than having to enter those people in one by one.
Is that behavior different if I'm on a team versus on an individual Sales Navigator subscription?
It does, because in Sales, so if you don't have the integration to your business application like CRM, if you're just on premium subscription, none of the stuff that we've been talking about with showing the widget in Dynamics or synchronization, none of that stuff would appear. It would just be, I'm using Sales Navigator for its purpose, I'm using Dynamics for the purpose, and I'm not doing the things in the two. But as we all know, and as we were talking about through this podcast, the benefit is when you use the two together, it unlocks so many great scenarios because A, saves sales productivity time, but two, it's enriching your data because not from a standpoint it's pulling in data from Sales Navigator, but more of it's giving you that information and insight in the context of the record when you're looking at it.
Yet another reason why businesses might want to consider moving their individual users into a team is that they will have a little more control over what happens to that data when those people leave.
Exactly. And the cost perspective too, because premium subscriptions, they're a little bit cheaper, but if you do that on a mass, to your point, like, it puts you a little bit of risk because you have no control of who's doing what, and you can't push that information back into your business application. But two, when you get on a corporate contract, it actually, from a procurement perspective, it is actually a much cheaper value proposition than having a whole bunch of your sellers expensing a credit card. Yeah, exactly. And we see that a lot, and that's why one of the big values of moving to a corporate contract is you get that benefit when you, again, tie that into your corporate agreement.
Yeah. Well, Brian, really appreciate you coming on. This has cleared up a lot of questions that we had, and as well shown a light on where we're going. I think it's becoming each release more and more valuable, especially since we can start using the controls from LinkedIn Sales Navigator outside of the widget, and that's really exciting, along with the other things that are coming with Sales AI. And so really appreciate, how do people get in touch with you? How do people follow you online?
Yeah, thanks for offering that, Joel. So if you want to connect with me, it's very simply, as Joel and Steve know, because you guys are both social as well. You can just connect with me or follow me on LinkedIn. Just www.linkedin.com/in/Brian Galicia, BrianGalicia. I'm also on Twitter, same handle, Brian Galicia. Feel free, if there's anything that I can offer value of, happy to address that. But Joel and Steve, thanks for allowing me to be part of the conversation.
And Steve, thank you for being our guest George today. That was awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't as ornery as him, but I'll try harder next time.